Everything starts with housing because I would say that is the challenge for millennials and Gen Z. So I would say without question, the biggest financial issue that we face is finding affordable housing.
Hey, it's Kerry K. Taylor, and welcome to the Cash and Kerry podcast, the place where expert guests reveal the money wins and mistakes that make us human. Today I'm joined by Alini. She's a financial journalist who has written for the Wall Street Journal, Global News, and now she covers personal finance for the Globe and Mail. Her new book is called Money Like You Mean It, Personal Finance Tactics for the Real World, and it's available now. Hey, Erica, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
No, it's my pleasure. I've been following your work at Global for eons, so I'm thrilled that you've written a book that brings it all together for us.
Thank you. That's so nice. I've been following your work as well, so it's I'm a big fan.
Well, I'm more of a goof than you are. But the last time we spoke, I was escaping wildfires in British Columbia, and I was storing all my stuff in storage lockers. So right now we're under like 10 feet of snow. This climate thing is crazy.
Yes, I remember. I saw. So for a bit of background, Kerry tweeted that she was looking at prices of storage lockers, and it was this crazy summer of fire in BC. And I thought, wow, that's a personal finance story. It's like the personal finance side of climate change. And so we had this chat about, what do you do if you're surrounded by fire? You're trying to prepare and make sure, try to limit the financial damage as much as possible. And it was quite the interview. And that's why climate change is part of my book, because it's changing everything, including personal finance.
Well, I know climate change is a huge interest of yours. So let's go back there in a bit, because I want to start with the title of your book. You called it Money Like You Mean It. And I don't know, sometimes I feel like my money is mean to me. So why did you hit upon this as your topic?
Initially, honestly, I was thinking of writing a book for every age. And then I figured, because I wanted to write a comprehensive book that was kind of like a reference guide, a sort of, your go-to place, something to earmark and go back over and over as you face, different big choices in your life financially. I had to narrow it down to an age range. And of course, my own age, my own demographic made the most sense. But this thing that, the personal finance is becoming more complicated. I would say it's true most of all for millennials and Gen Z, older Gen Z. But that's mostly because of the housing market, because the crazy housing prices really bring the challenges to a whole other level. But aside from housing, there's so much that's, the personal finance becoming more complex.
Well, let's look into housing. It's a hugely emotional topic. It's probably the hottest topic in Canada and in cities across the world. And your beginning chapter is everything starts with housing. So let's look at housing affordability. What are we supposed to do? Where do we start?
Yeah, so I called it Everything Starts with Housing because I would say that is the challenge for millennials and Gen Z. So I would say without question, the biggest financial issue that we face is finding affordable housing. So being able to balance the cost of housing with the cost of the rest of your life. That is really where it's at for us. And so that's why, that's a huge decision. There aren't that many financial decisions that can sort of set the course of the rest of your life financially. Housing is one of those. So you got to get it right. And yes, it can be extremely emotional. And that's what I try to do. There's no magic wand. It's going to be tough. It's going to be, you're going to have, possibly face some difficult decisions, but it's good to, tackle it, clear-headed and to know what you're doing and have a framework to make a good decision. And so what I say is, if you're trying, I start from, my premise is there is financially nothing wrong with renting. So I was born and grew up in Italy, and I really had no concept there was anything wrong with renting. until I got to North America and I was like, oh, I guess it's very frowned upon for some reason. So I completely, like you don't need to own a house to be a financially functioning adult by any means. So how do you decide? You have to decide like whatever works best for you from a lifestyle point of view and from a financial point of view. That is the solution you have to go for. So here's how to decide. So first of all, I would say preliminary thing you have to get out of the way is, what is your time horizon? If you aren't stable and you think there's a good chance that you might move, change cities in the next 5 years, then don't buy. It costs so much. The transaction costs of buying a house and selling a house are so high that it really doesn't make any sense. If you're sort of looking for short-term housing, then it's default rent. If you're sort of looking for a long-term solution, I would say the first thing that you might want to do is compare the cost of renting to what I call the unrecoverable costs of owning a home. So we all have this idea that we probably picked up from our parents, at the dinner table, that renting is throwing money out the window, which it is. You're giving the rent goes to your landlord and you never see it again. But there's so much money that you're going to throw out the window as a homeowner too. This is one of the things I learned right away when I bought a house. It costs, like, houses are money pits. I don't care how new it is. I don't care, if it's in perfect shape, something will break every year. You're going to have to spend money every year for upkeep and repairs. Not to mention that, if you have a mortgage, you're essentially renting money from the bank. That interest rate is certainly not building equity, the interest that you pay in your mortgage. You're going to have property taxes. You're going to have home insurance. There are all kinds of costs that you pay as a homeowner that do not build equity. So you want to compare your rent to those costs. And there's a simple, back of the envelope rule in personal finance that you can use. So if you look at, two comparable houses in your area, one is for rent and one is up for sale. If 1 year's worth of rent is less than 5% of the market value of that house, then renting is a good deal. And vice versa, then you're in a sort of homeowner's market instead of a renter's market. So it's really good to have an idea of, what kind of market you're in. So let's say that renting is a good deal. I'd say step two is, it doesn't matter if, even if renting is a good deal, you have to be able to afford the rent. If you can't save it as a renter, you're going to be in big trouble. You can be a wealthy renter if you can comfortably save and invest. So that's another, thing to keep in mind. If you cannot comfortably rent, then you're facing, the choice is, you're going to have to move out and see if you can, find something cheaper, maybe a little further afield, a different town, a different area. Or you're going to have to think about increasing your income somehow. And it's really a bummer because there are a lot of great jobs that don't pay very much in big cities. I know all about that. So it is a difficult decision, but again, this is all about being clear-sighted. And I would say, even if, say you're happy with renting, you've done the math, it's the right thing to do financially. Then you run into the other problem that there's a lifestyle issue with renting here in Canada. Not always and not everywhere. I know tons of long-term happy renters, especially in Alberta. But depending on where you are, I think in Toronto for sure, and I'm thinking probably Vancouver is the same. It's really tough. Like if you want to have a family and you're going to need a bigger house, it's very difficult to find rentals big enough for families. So much of the rental market was built with investors, real estate investors in mind, and not tenants. And so we have all these tiny shoebox apartments that are affordable for your mom and pop real estate investors, but they have no storage space, no sound insulation, they have the microwave and the marble countertops, and that's going to be great if you're single. But the moment you start to, want something more, it can be really difficult to find something that's going to work for you and to find the stability, for example, like find a landlord that will want to sign you up for a lease that's more than a year. So there's, set aside the math and see if you can find a rental solution that works for you.
Yeah, I was lucky or unlucky enough to live in both Vancouver and Toronto just as housing prices went bonkers. And I have to say, like, just watching the ladder get pulled up in front of you, it's so heartbreaking because there's no way to save enough money to keep up with that. So yeah, we rented when we were in those cities. And I have to say, when I became a parent, it became really hard to live in one of those shoebox apartments because it's really advantageous to have a room where you can close the door and put your kid in there at night so you're all not stuck in the same room. So real estate is just, it's so difficult. So I cannot agree with you more. But you also touched upon investing. So whether we're renting or we're homeowners, you say that learning about investing is not optional. So what are my options?
Yeah. So it's funny because I started writing this book right before the pandemic, and then so much changed as I was writing, and investing is one of those. So I had this whole chapter planned out where I was going to argue that, so many people are afraid of investing, and investing has traditionally been treated as the personal finance 2.0, that like the advanced stage for experts, budgeting is the basics. And then, if you really want to get into it, then you learn to invest. And I do still argue against that mindset in my book, saying, if you don't have a generous employer pension, which, unless you work in government, you probably don't, then you absolutely need to know how to invest, because otherwise chances are you're not going to have enough money in retirement. But as I was writing, then we had the crazy pandemic stock market, the bull market, and everyone, especially millennials and older Gen Z, started getting into the stock market. And instead of having all these people afraid of investing, it started kind of seeing the opposite problem of people getting super confident about their investing skills and, bragging about having all their money in a single stock and stuff like that. And so basically what I had to kind of rewrite the chapter midway through to say, even if you made a lot of money through the pandemic and you feel like you got a handle on this, you have to know the basics. Learning about investing is not optional, whether you're afraid of investing or whether you feel super confident about investing. Take a step back and make sure that you learn the basics. And by basics, I mean, you really don't need to know anything very exotic. Just have a clear understanding of what is risk when you're putting money in the financial market and how do you manage it, which is really sort of what I go over in the chapter.
It's really about looking at risk versus fear versus greed versus, well, what are some of the investments that, people can get into? I mean, when you look at risk and fear and greed, it's like, okay, well, how do you make that balance if you're just starting out?
Yeah, so I talk about how to manage risk, right? There different things to think about. One of them obviously is diversification is one way to manage risk. So you're putting your money in many different baskets, so making sure that you're spread out across many companies, many industries, in many countries, even, so that if something happens, something goes down, then you're going to have something that goes up, and that's one way of managing your risk, and then a very easy way. So my approach to investing is to keep it simple, low maintenance, and low cost. And so three simple ways to do that: sort of low cost, low effort investing, three options, a solid option in Canada. And it's all about index investing, three ways of getting into index investing, which just means sort of following the ups and downs of a broad stock market index. You got index mutual funds, all-in-one ETFs or asset allocation ETFs, and robo-advisors. Those are three very valid options. They have some small pros and cons. It might work, one might work better than the other for your particular situation, but they're all three solid options, and that's what I discuss in the chapter.
No, it's great. I really enjoyed that chapter. And another thing I was really excited to see is that you have a whole section on making money. I mean, it's, most personal finance books don't go into that direction. But over the pandemic, we've seen people aren't shy to quit their jobs. It's called the Great Resignation. And at first I laughed, but then I found this is really true. One of my most popular posts on my blog is how to write a resignation letter. And that post gets crazy traffic every Thursday night and every Sunday morning. So I think those are the times where people sit back, reflect, and rethink and reevaluate their life's decisions and their career options. So I don't know, are people rethinking their choices that you're seeing? And is this a good time to career jump to find something better?
Yeah, so the Great Resignation. So speaking sort of, I used to be an economics reporter. So I guess speaking a little bit as an economics reporter, last time I checked, which was before the holidays, there wasn't a ton of evidence that we are seeing sort of a great resignation here in Canada to the extent that it's happening in the US. Anecdotally, I have to say, I am seeing it just in my circle, lots of people changing jobs. But yeah, in aggregate, not so much. But I have to say, I mean, there's two things happening. We have a very tight labor market, all kinds of labor shortages. So since I've been in the labor force and I started smack in the middle of the financial crisis, this has been by far the best labor market that I've ever seen, where workers in so many industries have more bargaining power than they've had in decades. The other thing that could spur people to change jobs is inflation, right? Like inflation is moving fast. It's really high. We haven't seen it. I have no memory of inflation this high personally, and so living costs are really, like, I can see it. Everyone's seeing it. Like your grocery bill is concerning. And switching jobs in many industries is unfortunately the only way in which you're going to get a significant raise. And so even if, again, we don't have a ton of aggregate evidence that Canadians are, sending in resignation letters en masse, I wonder whether that's going to happen. I wonder whether a lot of people will be quitting and switching jobs just to take advantage of this great labor market and to keep ahead of inflation.
Yeah, I'm actually seeing a lot of movement in the high tech market. I come from a computer science background, and all my friends are just job leaping just so they can, I guess, reset their income level. Because if you've been with a job 5 or so years, you're kind of locked into just an inflationary raise. And those raises aren't reflecting actual inflation, right? They're like 2%. So they're not hitting like the 5% that we're actually seeing. So I'm seeing like there's movement in that sector. So I'm going to ask you, okay, so if people are moving around or they're thinking of moving around, how do we make sure that we're getting a salary or that we're getting paid what we're worth?
Yeah, so that's super important, negotiating your salary. And job hopping is, the whole idea is that when you're switching employers, you have more bargaining power than you normally would as an existing employees. You've gone through what could have, probably was a grueling interview process. You've been selected, you're number one, you're the person that they want, and now you get to ask, right? And so it's really, really important. And every time I talk about negotiating your pay, everyone assumes that I'm super comfortable with it. I am absolutely not. I am awkward. I am shy. It's not something I like to do, but I've learned how important it is. So just, psych yourself up and you got to do it. And to do it right, you have to prepare. So how do you prepare? So you have to figure out like what is, and you may get a pay range, but you might not. So you have to figure out like what is a good compensation for the role. What is a competitive compensation for the role that that you're getting. The best way to do that is to do your own on the ground intelligence. Gather your own on the ground intelligence. So See if, you have colleagues or former colleagues who have had that role that you're applying for, or maybe managed that role, so they would know what the compensation is. And just ask them. If it's not their job, sort of ask them what's the right compensation. If it is their job, you don't want to ask them, so how much are you making? But a much better question to ask that's not quite so forward is, you play what this HR expert that I interviewed for the book, Alison Venditti, she calls it the over-under game. So just, pick a number that you think is, is probably right, and say, hey, are you making more or less than X amount? And you'd be surprised. She tells me, Venditti was telling me, especially women are constantly surprised. Like they're constantly undervaluing themselves. And so the over-under game, if you do it, especially with a few people, you're going to get a pretty good range. And make sure, if you're a woman, make sure you ask men what they're, whether they're making more or less than X amount. That could help you make sure that you're not sort of shooting yourself in the foot by asking for something that's too low. Once you have a pretty good idea of the range, it's really important that you come up with an anchor value. So ideally, you get to go first. You don't always do. Employers like to go first, and they will lowball you. So what do you do then? You do not want to go, like, say you have, a certain amount in mind, say, I don't know, 75,000. You absolutely do not want to ask for 75,000. You want to ask for quite a bit more. So let's say you're going to ask for 85,000. That gives you a little bit of room to negotiate and make concessions and still hit that target that you have in mind. And once you've agreed on base salary, remember that even if you don't, especially if you don't get, like, probably not in this market, but in a tighter market, in a market where we have higher unemployment, in a more difficult market, you might not get exactly what you want. But remember, there is so much more you can ask for than just your base salary. There's, cash bonuses, stock options, there's flexible work arrangements, super important, especially if you have kids. You can ask to have a predictable schedule, or, at least know your schedule, maybe a week in advance. You can ask, remote work is super important right now. You can even ask, and I didn't know this, I learned this while I was writing the book, that you can ask for the waiting period for health and retirement benefits to be waived. Sometimes employers are willing to do that, which I was like, you gotta be kidding, because I hate those waiting periods. I wish I'd known that sooner. And sometimes, especially if you're moving, say, maybe from a government job where you have a really cushy pension to a private sector job that may be more competitive when it comes to pay, but less competitive when it comes to retirement benefits, you can inquire about having a retirement payout. So basically a lump sum that's meant to kind of make up for the fact that you're moving from a more generous to a less generous pension program. Or
it's almost completely opposite to what I learned. I always learned that the person who mentions money first loses. So, but I guess the behavioral science behind it is showing that this anchor premise is what can really mess you up when it comes to getting what you're worth right out of the gate.
Yeah, this is all it's based on, so behavioral research negotiating anything. It's not just pay. Like whoever goes first, like the first things that, the first value or proposition that comes out in talks is generally like the anchor, like what we try to, our brain focuses on. And if it's low, it tends to anchor things down, right? And that's
right.
Why you want to go high. Like if your employer is going low, like make sure you go high so you can meet somewhere in the middle. If you start out with what you want, you're going to end up with less than you want.
Yeah, I mean, I've made mistakes in negotiating my pay when I was working in high tech. And now that I'm a gig or freelance, employee type, I have to renegotiate my paycheck every single time. And I have to say it's really exhausting because it's nonstop. But one thing I learned really early on when I was in tech is that it really helps to have, I guess, an ally that works on the same team as you. This happened to me. So I learned that I was being terribly underpaid, like close to 20,000. And one of my team members who had the same education, the same background, the same skill level, he knew I was being underpaid. So when he left a job hop to another position, he left a note on my desk what his salary was. And it was like, I couldn't believe it. But that was like the biggest help to me, because then I realized I wasn't just being paid 10 or 15% under, it was significant. So I was pretty angry, and I went into HR and I'm like, you're underpaying me. And they wouldn't budge. So I said, see ya, I'm off.
Yeah.
I know what this job is worth. And it was great because he actually hired me in the job that he moved to. So, I had another ally there and I was paid equally. But to so many women, we don't know, right? Because job salaries aren't posted, they're not public. I mean, I can use Glassdoor to try and help so you can get kind of a baseline, but it's just such a dark magic sort of thing to tease through and figure out. But I love the over-under game, because I think that's a really less abrasive and easier way to get to people to figure out, where exactly I can be when I ask.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say it's super important to have an ally. And I've had similar experiences. And also it's very important to be an ally, right? Like even as a woman, we know that racialized women, people with disabilities are underpaid even more. So just be open, share, so that, we can all get the pay that we deserve.
So I love the chapter in your book about the retirement myth, because I feel this so hard. When I was growing up, the story on the advertisements was Freedom 55, right? And it's all these really youngish people traveling. They look amazing. They're dressed amazing. But that's really a myth now. I don't see this happening to anyone in any of our demographics. So what are your thoughts on why retirement is such a myth now?
Yeah, my goodness. I mean, I was thinking even Freedom 65 was a myth, like 55.
I
It's
know,
like you're
right?
tripping.
That's what the ads were when I was growing up. It was all Freedom 55. And I'm like, wow, that's not going to happen for us.
No,
What a
it's
perfect
also,
world.
I have to say, it's not happening for a lot of boomers either.
No.
So yeah, no, I would say retirement is this idea of retirement is a bit of a myth, not because you don't want to, saving saving so that you are able at some point to stop working if you want to stop working, or at least significantly reduce your workload, step off the hamster wheel. That's super important. But this idea that, we're going to go from working all the time to, aquafit classes or fishing or whatever it is, that's
Right.
kind of really disappearing. It's not just a matter that fewer and fewer people are actually able to retire at 65. They have to work longer, just to be able to have the savings that they need. It's also that a lot of people don't want to retire completely. Like there's a lot of people who like their jobs and would like to simply take it a little easier, have a little more time, have and change the way they work from, working to pay the bills to working to do something that you enjoy. That is really what retirement is becoming, this switch from I no longer need to work, I want to work. And so the whole idea of retirement is becoming much more, it's really a more of a gradual shift than sort of a black and white thing. And there's really nothing wrong if you like your job and you like working, to just keep working beyond 65. Is not, it's not a failure to not be able to retire by 65. And honestly, if you look at the statistics and you look at history, retirement's been a bit of a myth forever, not just for our generations. The idea that, you had a job and you had this great pension and then you get the gold watch and retire at 65, that was really mostly true for men. Even if you go back it's the 50s and 60s, like a lot of women were in the workforce and they had all these precarious part-time jobs that didn't have pensions. So it's always been a bit of a myth.
So, okay. So for if we're starting out, or if we're in the middle of it, or if we just want to get started today, because today is always a fresh start, how would you say we start to save? I know you've incorporated some behavioral science in there as well to help get past the human nature of do nothingness. So where do we start using the science that can help us?
Yeah. And so I want to be very clear. So I would kind of let go the idea that you're going to retire at 65, especially because so many of us are staying in school longer. We're much more likely to have employment gaps. It's going to take a little longer than 65 maybe to get to the point where you can pull back. But it's super important to save up, to be able to have that financial freedom to stop working because you have to pay the bills. That really is the goal, that financial freedom. And so you got to start, the sooner you start, the better. And that's probably lots of people are familiar with this, the importance of compound interest, the money, the interest, earning interest on interest, the longer your time frame for saving for retirement, time is really what supercharges compound interest. So the sooner you start, the better. How much to save for retirement is really a bit of a difficult question. If you're just starting out and you have no idea what your income is going to be, you have no idea what you want in retirement. So it's really super important. Just focus on establishing the habit of saving for retirement. Look at your budget, see, what looks doable. And even if it's like $50 a month initially, just put it away. And then every year sort of reassess how much you're saving based on your salary, your income. If you got a raise, then, give yourself a raise in terms of your retirement savings as well. And, if inflation went up, try to keep up with inflation. And that's how you start, early on. And then as you get a little bit closer to retirement and, you have an idea of maybe what your income trajectory is going to be and, what you want to do in retirement, what kind of lifestyle you want to have and what your needs are going to be financially, then you can get into some of the more complicated math of trying to figure out what you need and what you need to save up to get there.
I always look at if people get a bonus or they get an inflationary raise. I was always thinking, well, maybe just put the bonus in your RSP or your tax-free savings account, or take that inflationary raise if it's not cutting too much into your cost of living, and let it go in, because then you're not feeling the pinch as hard. So that's always something I get my husband to do. He's a little grumpy about it, but because he's got a full-time job it's something that works as well if you're in that kind of a job situation.
Yes, that works very well if you have a steady job.
Yeah, I don't. So I can't do that. There's nothing steady about my work. So I'm like a lot of gig or freelance people out there. We're growing numbers. So guys, if you're out there, I get it.
Since we just brought up sort of freelancing and gig work, that is something that I talk about in the book. So maybe, I'd love to chat about that, because as you said, I wanted to tackle the income part of the equation because it's such a challenge for young people, and it's super important. Personal finance is not just about penny pinching and investing. It's all about, it's also about making sure that you make enough money. And, how do you do that? It's no longer just get a job and start saving. It's well, do you get a steady job? Are you better off freelancing and being your own boss? Should you have a side hustle? And I wanted to have a whole discussion about side hustles because they're so mythologized, especially online. And I'm really against working all the time. And so I wanted to sort of provide a framework for people to try to evaluate whether having a side hustle is worth the hassle or not.
Yeah. The side hustle. Should I hustle with the side hustle?
And because I've been a freelancer and I've had a lot of steady jobs, and I have to say I would so love to be able to be a freelancer, but I constitutionally can't. I'm just one of those people who need the structure. I am not a good boss of myself.
Neither am I. I am the worst boss ever. She doesn't give me a break. She won't let me go out for holiday. She makes me sit in my basement, worst boss ever. But there's advantages too.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of advantages.
So who should do a side hustle and who shouldn't?
Yeah, so a side hustle. I mean, you can have a side hustle even if you have a full-time job, right? But yeah, there's this whole idea, especially because millennials, like, because we need so much income just to make ends meet and buy a house, right? There's this whole idea of like, oh, it's just going to work super hard and, we're going to be tough, but you burn out really quickly. And also being burned out is not good. Like you may miss, like if you're working all the time and you don't have time to stop and think about what you're doing and where you want to go with your life, you may miss opportunities. You kind of get tunnel vision when you're working all the time. So when should you get a side hustle? So my perspective is, if you're working to more than one job all the time, then that's not good. That just means you need to get a better job, period. Like focus on the one job and get something that pays better. But side hustles can be good. And I would say they're good in three instances. One is if you have something that you really like doing and you can monetize it. And, it's a hobby, it relaxes you, it gives you something else to do. You use a different part of your brain and you can make money on it. Absolutely. That's great. Just make sure that it doesn't become a second job. Like even if you're baking, if you find yourself, 10 p.m. at night, in a frenzy of flour and eggs, that
sounds like fun. I'd like to be in a frenzy of flour and eggs. That sounds like great.
If it becomes stressful, watch out. Another thing, like side hustles can be like a good short-term sort of way to boost your income. So say like you really want that vacation, and then maybe, temporarily you pick up a side gig just to get you there. Or maybe you're saving for a down payment for a house. And then, maybe for a few years you have a side hustle just to help you save faster. You have a specific goal and specific end date. That's fine. And side hustles can be a great way to transition to a different career without sort of incurring. It's a low risk and low cost way of transitioning to a different career. It's kind of like you start doing it, you start exploring a different field with a side hustle. And then if you like it, gradually you build contacts, maybe you build clients. And then, when you're finally ready to make the big jump, you kind of like, you already know the job very well. You don't have a huge learning curve. You don't have to study, your income never dips. It can be I know a lot of people who have used side hustles to gradually transition to a completely different field that they liked better. And basically, they boosted their income and they never needed to take a break and go to school. So yeah, those are three things I think that, side hustles work really well for.
I definitely fit in group 3. I mean, I was a software developer and I started the blog, and it was mostly just to educate my colleagues how to better invest their money for retirement. Because I saw all these guys buying cars and I was riding my bicycle to work and brown bagging my lunch, and they were just spending all this money. So it should have tipped me off that they were making a lot more than me, but I started the blog, I know, right? But I started the blog to try and get them to invest more of that money for the future. And it took off. I couldn't believe it, but I was doing it anonymously. So I didn't want my employer to know I was explaining how to maximize our retirement plan, but it took off and it was a lot of fun. And I was just writing articles for my colleagues. And next thing I knew, we put it on a blog and then it went crazy. So that can happen, whether you've got like a social channel or if you do run a website. It's bizarre how things can just take off. And I really found it hard at first because here's my voice out there, and it's really intimidating to put an opinion or, as you know, to put yourself out there. But when you do, some really magical things can happen. So if you're that person listening right now and you think, oh, I have this idea, go with Erica's number 3 option and get your toes in the water, get your feet in the water and see how that works for you. Because taking a chance when you've still got income in the background, as you say, it's not a huge risk and it could be high return.
Definitely. Yeah. And it's also sometimes you have a fantasy that you really like, a certain job. Like I wanted to be a foreign correspondent. I never thought I'd be writing about money. And then I actually tried it out. And I was like, I so do not like this. I am not cut out for it.
But you're great at it. You're like one of Canada's top financial writers.
Journalism, absolutely. I always wanted to be a journalist. I just didn't know what kind of journalist I wanted to be. Right. And I was shocked for my entire, life growing up. I wanted to be a foreign correspondent. And when I actually tried it out for real, I was like,
Okay, so Erica, where can we find you?
So you can find me at the Globe and Mail. It's and on Twitter, I'm at Alini. So if you have things that you want to bring to my attention, things that you think I should cover in terms of personal finance, or you want to tip me off about something, feel free to get in touch, both through my email at the Globe or Twitter. My DMs are open. And if you're interested in buying my book, it's available everywhere you buy books. Obviously, Amazon and Chapters Indigo, but it really is in a ton of small independent library bookstores. So yeah, check it out. It might be on the shelf at the store right around the corner.
Amazing. So Money Like You Mean It, Personal Finance Tactics for the Real World. It really is a definitive source for everything money. The author is Erica Alini, and the book is on sale now, everywhere. And if you want to check out Erica's amazing work covering personal finance, head on over to the Globe and Mail and check out her Twitter account, Alini. That's at EALINI. And I have to say, she's a lot of fun. She's a great follow. And if you have a story to share with her, she's on it. Anything from climate change to the retirement myth, she's there. So Erica, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate having you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Wasn't Erica amazing? I really appreciate her detailed work and incredible experience. So I'm curious, what out of today's conversation resonated most for you? Leave a comment below and let us know. And as always, we've got some amazing conversations happening over at squawkbox.com. So head over there and leave a comment for us right now. And if you're not already subscribed to our email list, I don't know what you're thinking. You'll get access to our free budget bundle to help you get a fresh start with your money. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time.
It was great. It was so much fun.
Was it fun?
Yeah.
Was it more fun than the other people?